Welcome to The Bitter Witness.
Don't be scared.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Rebecca, and I'm your host for The Bitter Witness. I hope you've had a good week. As it seems to be my status quo, I've been ridiculously busy this week. Painting the set, working on the next episode, breathing, the important shit in life. The play that I'm co-directing is coming along excellently. It gets better and better each week. My friend Glossy and I, who I'm co-directing this production with, are usually in stitches with tears running down our face throughout the entire rehearsal. My bestie, Vanessa, has a part in the production on stage. Did you hear that? Miley just burped in my window, and so she's like 20 feet away from me, and she just belched. Good job, girl. As I was saying, Vanessa, my bestie, has a part in this production. She's on stage for this one, and I have to say her character is put through the ringer, and as a true bestie, I am pissing myself every time she is thrown, punched, or knocked out on stage. Love you, V. So last week, for some reason, while I was recording the episode, I felt my mouth had to be directly on the microphone. So I apologize for the distortion you got in the episode, and I will try to do better. If enough of you support the show, I could build a real studio. It's a pipe dream, but I'm going to try and manifest it. Speaking of supporting the show, let's get the business out of the way. If you enjoy this episode or any episode, or you just feel like supporting a woman trying to start her own little empire, head over to the Patreon page and support the show. You can also support the show on Spotify. Please like and follow the show on whatever platform you're listening on, and don't forget to share the show with all your friends and maybe a few strangers as well. If you have any ideas for future episodes, or you just want to drop me a line and say, hey, I'm listening, send me an email at thebitterwitness@gmail.com. That's enough of the business for this week. Today's episode was sent to me by one of my dear friends, Monique. Thanks, Monique. Love you. And since it is still spooky season, this case fits into both categories perfectly. The dogs are sleeping behind me, so puppy ASMR will be brought to you by both Miley and Piper today. So grab a cup of tea. Definitely throw a shot in that teacup. You're going to need something to calm your nerves because this case is absolutely awful. Sit back and relax while I tell you about the case of Daniel LaPlante. Teen psychopaths represent a disturbing and complex phenomenon in the realm of adolescent behavioral issues. Characterized by a lack of empathy, superficial charm, and manipulative tendencies, these individuals can cause profound harm to their peers and to their community. Understanding the signs of psychopathy in teenagers is crucial for prevention and intervention. Early recognition can lead to therapeutic strategies that may mitigate the risk of future violent behaviors and guide these young individuals toward healthier emotional and social development. Daniel LaPlante is often cited as a shocking case in the realm of juvenile crime. Sadly, this case horrifically illustrates the complexities that can arise in the psychology of a young person when early intervention does not occur. As always, I want to give the victims in this case top billing. As many of our other cases, there are several victims who have been affected by this case. So to all the victims affected by the case of Daniel LaPlante, I acknowledge you and I send my love to you wherever you may be. Frank Bowen and his 2 daughters lived in a beautiful area in Pepperell, Massachusetts. Their home was surrounded by lush forest. They had a picturesque setting for their family to enjoy. But in 1986, Frank's 2 daughters, Tina and Karen, started noticing that weird things were happening inside their home. Things wouldn't be where they left them. Lights would turn off on their own. Sometimes the girls would take a glass of milk up to their room and then go to the washroom, and when they came back, the glass would be empty. TVs would change channels on their own when the girls weren't touching the remote. The girls told their dad Frank about these things, but Frank figured it was just their imagination or one of the girls playing pranks on her sister. Nothing to concern himself about. But Frank had a small nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach. Could these things that the girls are talking about be related to all the weird little things that had been happening to the house for the past 6 months? Over the previous 6 months, Frank had noticed some things. These little things tended to run chills up and down his spine when they happened, but those chills disappeared almost as quickly as they had appeared. Bumps in the night inside the house. Human shadows on the walls during lightning flashes. People playing Nicky Nicky Nine Doors. Around October-ish in 1986, Frank found the phone lines to the house had been cut. And he noticed that the girls were fighting more and more, and quite honestly, he realized that they all seemed to be on edge. So in November of 1986, Frank put the house on the market. Maybe he wanted to try a fresh start with him and his girls. I couldn't find the exact reason why Frank put the house on the market. There was so much happening inside that house, you can take your pick. A year earlier, Frank had lost his beloved wife and the girls' mother to cancer. Frank and the girls were still grieving this unimaginable loss. Frank thought that perhaps Tina and Karen's behavior and the wild imaginative things they said were happening in the house were simply a part of the grieving process for 2 little girls who had lost their mother. Tina and Karen continued experiencing these weird happenings, and there are some sources that state that the girls even held a seance to try and contact their mother, thinking maybe it was her who was moving the things in the house. But on December 9th, 1986, Frank, Tina, Karen, and a friend of the girls, Kathleen, returned home after an outing. When Frank opened the door to the house, the family was confronted by a terrifying scene. All the radios and TVs were on high volume, blasting sound, and every light in the house was on. Frank was immediately concerned that they had been robbed, so he slowly made his way through the house, telling the girls to stay by the back door. As Frank slowly made his way through the house, he noticed that the toilet in the basement had been used, and there were several things throughout the house that had been moved from their usual places. Frank had been through the entire house and found nothing and no one, but he still had to search the front foyer. He slowly made his way to the front door, placed his hand on the doorknob of the closet, and when he swung the door open, he found a man wearing his wife's fur coat, makeup on his face, hair sticking straight up in spikes, and wielding the hatchet and steel wrench that Frank kept up in his bedroom for protection. It was Daniel LaPlante inside that closet. LaPlante took a step towards Frank and whispered, "Go get the girls and take them up to a bedroom." LaPlante was extremely calm as he told Frank the instructions. Frank yelled for the girls to come to him and placed himself between LaPlante and the girls. LaPlante followed the family to the bedroom, the entire time wielding the hatchet and wrench. When they arrived at the bedroom, Frank was able to slam the bedroom door shut before LaPlante could enter behind them, and he wedged it. Frank needed to come up with a plan. Super dad of the fucking millennium right there, folks. The terror that I felt while I was researching this case, I have chills right now. Oh my God. Tina was hysterical inside the bedroom. Despite Frank trying to get her to calm down, Tina decided she was out, so she hoisted up the window in the bedroom and started climbing out. Frank pleaded with her not to jump out the window, but Tina was too hysterical. She leapt from the bedroom window. Tina landed with a thud on the ground, but thankfully was unharmed. She immediately got herself up and ran to the neighbor's house, screaming for help. The call came into the Pepperell Police Department shortly after 6 p.m. When the dispatcher picked up the call, she was in shock for a millisecond. The caller informed her that their neighbor's daughter had just come running to their home, stating that her father and sister and friend were being held hostage inside their home by a man with a hatchet. Police were immediately dispatched to 93 Lawrence Street. Upon arrival at the home, officers went to the neighbor's house and started talking with a visibly terrified and upset Tina. Tina told the officers what had happened and that her father, sister, and friend were being held hostage by a man with a hatchet and wearing makeup. Tina then gave the police officers both of the phone numbers that belonged to her home. Police tried calling both the numbers, but the calls just rang and rang. No one was picking up. Police officers then started surrounding the Bowen home as part of their strategy to rescue the family. All of a sudden, a police officer saw a small flash of light and movement in an upstairs window. Police gathered on the ground under the second-story window when suddenly Frank appeared at the window. He threw up the window and yelled to the officers to come and help. Frank slowly lowered Karen and Kathleen down to the waiting arms of the officers. Frank then jumped from the window to safety. He told the police officers that the man was either still inside the house or he had fled. He just wasn't sure at that point. While a couple of police officers escorted Frank and the girls over to the neighbor's home to find Tina, the rest of the officers entered the Bowen home. Lieutenant Thomas Lane stated that police officers repeatedly searched the home, the yards, the woods, the roads, but there was no sign of the man anywhere. It was like he just literally vanished. The only trace left of the man who terrorized the Bowens that night was the sliding back patio door was slightly ajar, and outside the door the police found the hatchet and the wrench. Police brought in scent dogs to try and track the escape route of the man. The police gave the dogs the hatchet and wrench to get a scent from, but the dogs found no trace on either. This was Frank's hatchet and wrench that he kept on his nightstand, and if Frank was right, he believed the man was wearing gloves, which might have thrown the dogs off. Police told Frank that it might be best if he and the girls were to vacate their home for a few days while they conducted their investigation into what happened. Frank agreed and took the girls to stay somewhere else for a while. I couldn't find where the family went, and I honestly don't think it matters that much to anyone, other than Frank and the girls. Frank told the police officers that he was pretty sure that the man in the house was between 17 and 26 years old, but with the face paint and the way he had his hair spiked up, Frank and the girls couldn't be sure if the man's hair color was blonde or dark or whether the man had a mustache or not. Frank stated that he was pretty certain that the man had been wearing gloves, but he thought that perhaps he had noticed that one of the fingertips on the gloves had been missing. The police collected 2 different telephones that had been ripped off the walls and the hatchet and wrench, hoping that there might be some prints on one of the items. Frank and the girls couldn't think of anyone who would want to do something like this to them, but Frank told the police that he had a feeling that the person might have been in his house for a while, messing with everybody inside it. Lieutenant Lane stated that the entire family were telling the same story about the happenings, but the police were a little skeptical because if you were to remove the emotions from the stories that the family were telling, the story seemed really wild. Lane stated in an interview that the story that was told to law enforcement did stretch the limits of credibility to some extent. Think about it. What are the chances that there is someone coming in repeatedly and messing with the family the way that LaPlante did to the Bowens? Logically, you would think that at least Frank would have noticed something, right? But don't forget, Frank and the girls were dealing with their first year without their wife and mother. It's a lot on their plate. I think if I were living inside that house, my mind would automatically jump to someone or something is haunting me. The last thing I would think of is that there was an actual person inside my home. Your home is a safe space. You don't think anyone's going to come in and breach that safe space. Okay, we need to stop and take a breath. I don't need to take a tea break right now because so far, this case has already made me pee my pants. Can you imagine opening the door to your house to hear all your TVs and stereos blaring and all the lights on? I would have been so far gone from that house. And can we also take a moment to shout out our brave little warrior Tina, taking off out of the window to get help for her family? I would have done the exact same thing. Well, I would have tried. Depending on the window, my fat ass might not have fit through it, or at the very least, I probably would have broken a hip from the jump down to the ground. But not Tina. That girl, she is badass. She saved her family. On December 10th, 2 days after the terrifying incident with LaPlante, Frank returned to the house to grab some things for himself and the girls. When he pulled into the laneway, something caught his eye in the front window of the house. There stood LaPlante, just staring out the window. Frank immediately contacted police and told them that he saw the man inside his house. Police were initially skeptical that the man was in the house again because they had already checked the house from top to bottom and it had been sealed for 2 nights. The officer who responded to the call was polite to Frank, who was pretty much losing his shit. Officer Steve Bazanzan, and I'm not sure if I actually said that correctly, so I apologize to Steve Bazanzan. Officer Steve Bazanzan placated Frank and told him he would go inside and check it out. As Bazanzan approached the house, he surveyed the grounds surrounding the home, and to him, there was no evidence that anyone had been there or that someone had broken in. There were no fresh shoe prints in the snow, and according to Bazanzan, the house was exactly the way it had been left 2 nights earlier, sealed up tight. As Bazanzan made his way up to the front door, he unlocked the door and stepped inside the house. As soon as his eyes adjusted to the interior of the house, a large knife came into view right in front of his face. Oh, and by the way, the knife was stabbed into the wall. Maybe Frank wasn't just being hysterical. Bazanzan slowly made his way to the stairs, gun drawn. When he reached the living room, his blood ran cold. There, on the furniture, was a message written in shaving cream that read, "I am in your room." Bazanzan cleared the living room and made his way to the dining room. There, he found a message scrawled on the wall, "I'll be back." And next to this message, there was a picture of one of the Bowen girls hanging on the wall with a knife stabbed through the picture. In the kitchen, on the counter, there were 2 glasses of champagne, poured and left without drinking. In one of the downstairs rooms, Bazanzan came upon a BB gun propped up inside the closet with the barrel of the gun pointing out. Bazanzan radioed for backup. Now he radios for backup? After finding the BB gun? Now? I would have radioed for backup before I went inside the house. I would have been screaming through the radio after I opened the front door and found the fucking knife stabbed into the wall. Jesus. There are so many people in this story that have balls of steel. It's unbelievable. 2 more officers arrived on the scene to help methodically search the house. They searched the attic, the basement. They searched every single nook and cranny of that house. So how did this shit snake get away again? Every door was locked, and the only tracks in the snow were those of the police that were standing inside the house. After the officers had searched the entire house, Bazanzan stopped and looked at the other 2 officers and whispered, "Don't make a sound. Just listen. When the three men stood still in the basement laundry room and listened, there was no sound. Bazanzan said to himself, "We're missing something. There's something that we just aren't seeing or hearing." Bazanzan scanned the laundry room looking for anything that seemed out of place. Once, twice, nothing. He started a third scan of the room and then he saw it. The toilet in the back corner. There was a false wall behind the toilet. It was built to hide the plumbing. The false wall had a triangular shaped space between it and the toilet. It was tiny, but it was there, and it was concealed. Bazanzan slowly approached the area and looked behind the wall. There was what seemed to be a heap of dirty clothes. Bazanzan took hold of the top piece of clothing and pulled it back. There, underneath, was a person crouching in the corner. Nope. My heart is racing. It was racing while I was writing this, and it's still racing while I'm telling you about it. I knew there was someone in behind that toilet. I knew it. I have goosebumps. My pants would have been so peed by now if I was in that basement. I would have been stepping in puddles. And this is why I can never be a cop. Mad respect for these guys, especially Bazanzan. Wow. The man crouching under the pile of clothes crawled out of the cubbyhole and stood up. It was Daniel LaPlante. The police handcuffed him and led him out of the basement. When Bazanzan walked the man in cuffs outside the house, Frank Bowen broke. He started crying and screaming. "You didn't believe me. You didn't believe me." I can't even imagine the feelings of vindication, anger, and relief at that moment that Frank was feeling. Take a second and imagine yourself in Frank's shoes at that moment, seeing them pull that shit snake who has been torturing your family for at least 6 months and tried to kill you and your kids out your front door. That is some intense fucking emotions that poor man must have been feeling at that moment. The shit pig that they pulled out of the Bowen basement refused to give the police his identity. Little punk. I don't know how Bazanzan didn't beat it out of him right there on the front steps of the Bowen house. Officer Bazanzan, you are a better human than I. I don't think I would have been able to stop myself from slapping that little bitch stupid right there on the front steps. When they got the shit snake down to the station and booked him, he finally gave up his name. He was 16-year-old Daniel LaPlante. 16. Oh my God. Dude, he's just a kid. I have changed my mind. I wouldn't have slapped him stupid on the front steps. I would have thrown that little shit snake over my knee and spanked the shit out of his ass. LaPlante was charged with breaking and entering, 4 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of armed assault, larceny over $100, and malicious destruction of property. Lieutenant Lane stated that he assisted with LaPlante's booking that day, and he says that instead of the usual 2 photos that police normally take of a suspect when booking, he had this weird feeling that 2 wouldn't be enough. So he took 6 photos of LaPlante. Lane stated in an interview that he had never done that before that day, and he has never done it since. Every other perp in his career had only 2 mugshots. Lane thought to himself, this punk is someone who is weird, bizarre, dangerous, smart. I am going to see this guy again. Lane had no doubt in his mind. Lane's feelings that night turned out to be prophetic. A Boston Globe article stated that LaPlante was held in a State Department of Youth Detention Center because he was a juvenile until his court date. While LaPlante was serving dead time, police continued to investigate the case. It was determined that LaPlante targeted the Bowen family after he had gone on a date with Tina. Tina didn't have any feelings for LaPlante, and the two never went out again, and Tina never gave him a second thought. But apparently, LaPlante became obsessed with Tina after that one date, and because his level of devotion wasn't reciprocated, he decided her entire family had to pay the price. 10 months go by, and LaPlante still hasn't had his day in court. The case was transferred from youth court to superior court, and when the case came before a judge in superior court, hold on to your asses, my friends, the judge ruled that LaPlante's bail would be set at $10,000. I seriously doubt that the Bowens felt that $10,000 bail was equal to the terror that he inflicted on them. Nevertheless, LaPlante's mother, Elaine, got a second mortgage on their home and bailed LaPlante's sorry ass out of jail. LaPlante was released from custody on October 9th, 1987. When people say the justice system failed them, this right here is what they are talking about. This shitpig should never have been let out on bail. But back in the 80s, obsessive stalking or infatuation to the point of violence wasn't even on the law books, and many judges didn't acknowledge its existence. Rebecca Schaefer, the actress from My Sister Sam TV show, was murdered by her stalker, and it didn't occur until 1989, and that is one of the main cases that helped to get laws to combat this type of crime into the law books. But in 1987, it didn't exist. LaPlante was due back in court in 2 months on December 11th, pretty much the 1-year anniversary from the attack on the Bowen family. Before that date could come, the enormity of the mistake of letting LaPlante out on bail would come to light. On the evening of December 1st, 1987, just 10 days before LaPlante was due in court, Andrew Gustafson came home to his house in Townsend, Massachusetts. The Gustafsons were a pretty happy family: Priscilla, the wife, Andrew, the husband, and 2 children, Abigail, a girl, 7, and William, a boy who was 5. Priscilla was a kindergarten teacher and had recently found out that she was a few weeks pregnant. The family was growing, and Andrew couldn't have been happier. They never really had any trouble where they were living on Saunders Street, except for a few weeks earlier they had reported a break-in at their home on November 16, 1987. Cordless telephones, TV cable boxes, a remote control, and some collectible coins had been taken, but in the grand scheme of things, nothing worth getting upset or doing something drastic like moving. Probably just kids messing around, Andrew thought. When he arrived home, he found his house dark and eerily quiet. With 2 small children, their house was always busy and full of light and life. Andrew immediately knew something was wrong. He ran to the door and went in. He called for Priscilla and the kids, but the only answer was his voice quietly echoing throughout the house. Andrew frantically went through the entire house, room by room, looking for his family. When he reached his and Priscilla's bedroom, he found her. She was lying face down on the bed with a pillowcase over her head. Priscilla had been shot with a .22 caliber gun, and she had been raped. Andrew called 911 and police responded immediately. When they arrived, they found an inconsolable Andrew who told them where and how he found Priscilla, but that he couldn't find his 2 children and that they had to be in the house. Police entered the house. They found Priscilla exactly where and how Andrew said she would be. They continued searching, and eventually, police found 7-year-old Abigail's body in a bathroom. She had been drowned and had injuries that suggested she had suffered blunt force trauma to her head and compression of her neck. Next, they found 5-year-old William's body in another bathroom. He, like his sister, had been drowned. Police began their investigation into the triple homicide. They collected hundreds of pieces of evidence from the house. the pillowcase that was over Priscilla's head, bodily fluids found in a corner of the bedspread from Andrew and Priscilla's bed, part of a condom on the floor, a knotted brown sock, and what seemed like several ligature tools. And they all seemed to be makeshift, as though the killer had tried to create them themselves as they were murdering the family. These makeshift ligatures consisted of a tie, several socks, and a pair of nylons. Outside the home, they found a pillow from Andrew and Priscilla's bed. The pillow had 2 bullet cartridges inside it, like the killer had shot the bullets into the pillow. If I had to take a guess, I would say that the killer was most likely trying to use the pillow as a silencer for when they shot Priscilla. Lieutenant Lane was sitting at a courthouse miles away from this horrific crime scene when he heard over the radio that a mother and her 2 children had been brutally terrorized and murdered in their home. Lane stated in an interview that when he heard this, the very first thought that popped into his head was, "I wonder what LaPlante is doing lately." Law enforcement was carrying out the investigation into Priscilla, Abigail, and William's murders, and as they worked through the crime scene, the evidence led them in a familiar direction. Right to Daniel LaPlante, literally. Townsend Police Chief William May was searching the outside of the Gustafson home, and he noticed footprints inside a flower bed. May followed the prints around to the front of the house, and they led right to a spot on the house where May could see that there was obviously a nameplate or a plaque of some sort had been removed. Chief May called in the tracking dogs to follow the prints. On December 2nd, at around 1 a.m., Trooper Robert Hippler arrived with his canine partner, Mike, a German Shepherd. Hippler gave Mike the pillow that was found outside on the ground. Mike immediately snatched a scent from the pillow and took off running. Police ran behind Mike as he followed the scent through a path through the woods. But at the end of the path there was a creek, and Mike stopped. It was a dead end. Police decided to call it a night and try and have the canine unit attempt to follow the trail during the daylight. Later in the afternoon on December 2nd, another tracking dog was brought out. This canine officer was named Spike. Much like Mike earlier, Spike grabbed hold of a scent from evidence at the crime scene and took off into the woods. Police followed behind Spike as he ran through the thick trees and bush that surrounded Gustafson's home. Suddenly, Spike stopped at a pile of clothing and other items that were strewn about on the ground. There was a blue and white flannel shirt that was wrapped around a pair of sopping wet work gloves. As well, there was a nameplate with the name Gustafson, most likely what was missing from the front porch of the Gustafson home. Spike had stopped at the pile of items and started nosing the blue and white flannel shirt. Suddenly, Spike was off again, this time following a scent he had picked up on the flannel shirt. Police again followed, and after a little bit, Spike started slowing down. He eventually stopped and stared straight ahead. When police looked in the same direction that Spike was staring at, they were literally 3 or 4 feet from the front door of Daniel LaPlante's home. When police knocked on the home, they found that LaPlante wasn't at home, so an APB went out for LaPlante. Trooper Stephen Matthews located LaPlante at the town library, where he was being tutored as per part of his bail conditions. LaPlante is described in a Boston Globe article as calm and cool as a cucumber as he informed Trooper Matthews that he had been home watching music videos on MTV all afternoon the previous day, December 1st, the day of the murders. To those of you who don't know, back in the 80s, MTV and Much Music used to actually play music videos, like around the clock. I miss the 80s. LaPlante told Matthews that the only time he had left the TV was when he had thought about cutting some wood outside on his family's property. He had gone outside to the shed behind the house to get a chainsaw, but, LaPlante informed Matthews, the shed was locked when he got there, so he went back inside his home. And later that evening, LaPlante attended his niece's birthday in the company of his mum. But other than that, LaPlante stated, he had been inside his home all day and night. Trooper Matthews asked LaPlante what, if anything, he knew about the murders at the Gustafsons' home. LaPlante answered, not very much, but my stepdad was watching the news when the story broke. LaPlante told Matthews that he and his stepdad had pulled out a map to find out where Saunders Road was in comparison to their home. They easily found Saunders Road on the map because it was only about a quarter of a mile as the crow flies through the woods from the Gustafsons to the house on Elm Street where LaPlante lived with his mother and stepfather. Elm Street. Fitting. Trooper Matthews then asked LaPlante if he had heard or seen anything the day before. LaPlante informed Matthews that he thought that he heard a door slam and some yelling around 3 p.m., but other than that, he hadn't noticed anything significant. As Matthews kept peppering LaPlante with questions, LaPlante's calm and cool demeanor seemed to start unraveling. Although LaPlante was able to keep his voice steady when answering Matthews' questions, there was a noticeable line of sweat that had developed on LaPlante's upper lip, and LaPlante seemed to become more jumpy and edgy as the questions went on. Matthews left the library for a little while, but then decided to return to the library and ask LaPlante a few more questions. But by the time Matthews got back to the library, LaPlante had been picked up by his mother, Elaine. Matthews headed over to LaPlante's house to ask LaPlante a few more questions. When Matthew knocked on the door of the house on Elm Street, Elaine LaPlante answered the door. She informed the trooper that LaPlante wasn't going anywhere with anyone, and no one was going to speak with her son without an attorney present. Trooper Matthews thanked Elaine, got in his cruiser, and left. Okay, let's hold on before we crucify Elaine. Although later your opinion that you have of her right now might be justified. I agree with Elaine by her saying that her son wasn't going to speak with any law enforcement agents without an attorney present. But I would have allowed Trooper Matthews into my home, and I would have called my attorney and put him on speaker or told him to get over there. I wouldn't have closed the door in his face. But that's just me, and I think Elaine knew what LaPlante had actually done. But at this point in the case, I don't blame her for saying what she said. Around 7:30 p.m., still on December 2nd, Trooper Matthews decided to try one more time to speak with Daniel LaPlante. As he pulled up outside of the LaPlante home, Matthews saw Daniel LaPlante jump off the back porch of his house and run into the woods. Now that LaPlante had been observed by police taking off and going on the run, they were able to obtain a search warrant for the LaPlante home. By this time, the police believed that the .22 caliber gun that was used to kill Priscilla Gustafson was stolen during a robbery that had occurred on October 14th, and LaPlante had been a suspect in that crime as well. While searching the home, police found bullet casings that matched the stolen gun, as well as the bullets that were identical to the ones that killed Priscilla. They also found a cordless phone and a TV cable box hidden in a tool cabinet. Both of these items matched the items that were reported stolen from the Gustafsons' home in November, a few weeks before the murder. With all the evidence that the police had accumulated at this point, a warrant was issued for Daniel LaPlante for 3 counts of first-degree murder. One of the biggest manhunts at the time was initiated. The police set up a command center in town, and because it was a huge manhunt, that caused the public to go more on edge than they already were from the senseless murders of Priscilla, Abigail, and William. The police received hundreds of calls from the public offering tips on LaPlante's whereabouts and citing men dressed in black sneaking around the neighborhoods and in the woods. The next town over from Townsend was Pepperell, and many of the calls that the police were receiving were coming in from there. Pepperell is the town where the Bowens lived. Lieutenant Lane figured that if Daniel LaPlante was going to be hiding out, he would pick a spot that he knew well and that was not in the vicinity of the command center, which, remember, is located in Townsend. Lane figured that LaPlante would most likely head towards the Bowen home, as that was far enough away from the command center, and he knew it quite well. Lieutenant Lane took 2 other police cruisers because that's all he could get his hands on, because the rest of the police force in Townsend and Pepperell were out looking for LaPlante and following up all the sightings. They started circling a large rectangular area of woods around the Bowen home. Lane stated in an interview that he knew that by circling a suspect with this intensity, it was almost a surefire way to keep their suspect in place. And Lane was pretty positive that they were on the right track. And as he was doing the circling around the rectangular area of woods, Lane got a gut feeling, or an intuition as some may call it, that he needed to be going in a clockwise direction around the woods. But at the moment he was going in a counterclockwise direction. So he pulled into the driveway of 123 Jewett Street to turn around. And when he did, the woman who owned the home, Lynn McGovern, was standing in the driveway and flagged Lane down. She approached the cruiser window and said, "I know what's going on. You're looking for the killer. Nothing's wrong that I can see, but I'm just getting back into my house after I've been gone for a few days, and I was wondering if you would come in with me and just make sure it's all okay." Lane said yes, although he was a little annoyed that he had to get out of the cruiser and essentially put the search on LaPlante for hold. But Lane stated in an interview that you never turn down a request like that. He figured he just needed to allay the fears of Lynn McGovern. Lane told his partner to stay in the cruiser and close to the radio in case anything broke while he was clearing Lynn's home. Lane walked up to the front door of Lynn's home, but he didn't notice anything in terms of forced entry or that someone had been around the house in the time that Lynn had been away. Lane stated in an interview that he walked into the house and he entered the kitchen, and he had only been in the house for about 5 seconds when he said, quote, "Things happened fast, and I mean damn fast," unquote. He heard an extremely loud thump above him, somewhere in the second level of the house. He pulled his gun out and silently made his way up the stairs. When he got to the top of the stairs, he found that the door to the top landing was shut, but right in front of that door was a 16-gauge bolt-action shotgun. Lane yelled down to Lynn, "Do you own a shotgun?" Lynn started screaming. Lane yelled out to his partner, who was in the cruiser in the driveway, and told him to get into the house fast, and then he radioed for backup. Lane wasn't sure if it was LaPlante who was inside the house, but his gut was telling him it was LaPlante, and so far, his gut had been right every time. The backup arrived and the house was surrounded, but once again, LaPlante was able to slip past them. He jumped out a second-story window of the house and ran into the woods. LaPlante ran through the woods and came out right by the house of Jonathan Lang. According to Lang, LaPlante had tried to get him to open the door and let him in, but thankfully, Jonathan refused to open the door to LaPlante. When LaPlante couldn't get into Jonathan Lang's house, he ran off again. He tried several other houses, but thankfully, everyone was safely locked inside their homes, and LaPlante couldn't get in. Police were receiving calls from residents all over the place saying that LaPlante had tried to get into their home, and they were following the calls as they came in. This game of cat and mouse between LaPlante and the police kept going well into the evening. Then Lieutenant Lane received a call that stated there was a suspicious person on Elm Street. Lane went to investigate. When he arrived on Elm Street, several residents came out of their home to speak with him and tell him what they had seen. Suddenly, an ear-piercing scream cut through all the conversations that were happening. The scream seemed to be coming from a home owned by Edward Galogi. Lane sped over to the house where the screams were coming from. He got out of the cruiser and yelled into the house, "Ed, is he in there?" Ed Galogi yelled back, "No, but get in here quick." Lane said he will never forget the feeling of his stomach dropping, hearing Ed yell those words to him that night. Inside the house, Ed's niece, Pamela Makala, was overwrought with emotion. At first, Lane was worried that something had happened to Pamela, or worse, that he wouldn't be able to get any information out of her because of the state she was in. But when Pamela saw Lane, she calmed right down. She told Lane that when she arrived home, she walked into the house to find LaPlante with a gun. Pamela stated that LaPlante informed her that he needed to get out of town, and since he only had a learner's permit, Pamela was going to drive him. Can we just stop for a second and think about that sentence? This is more proof as to how warped LaPlante's brain is. At this point, he's 17 years old. He has killed a pregnant mother, her 2 children, kidnapped a family after hiding inside their home for months and terrorizing them, and is now on the run from the police, who are, don't forget, hot on his heels. And he doesn't want to drive a car to get away because he might get caught driving a car without a full license? That is some fucked up thinking right there, my friends. Pamela, being the boss bitch that she is, told LaPlante that she would drive him anywhere he wanted to go. And instead of grabbing the keys to her regular car or her uncle's car, she grabbed the keys to a bright orange VW van that was out in the yard with for sale signs in the windows. Pamela and LaPlante got into the van, and Pamela started the engine. She shifted the van into gear and started to drive away. But Pamela knew that if she drove too far away from her uncle's house, she was dead. And so she decided that there was no way she was going to drive this shit puke wherever he wanted to go. So she came up with a plan. She drove up Elm Street and saw her uncle Ed Galogi speaking with someone in a car, which in fact was Lieutenant Lane. When Pamela drove past the town hall, which was at the end of Elm Street, Pamela took her shot. She jumped from the moving vehicle. She was then picked up by a neighbor who was passing by in their car and brought back to her uncle's house, which was literally 100 yards away. After Pamela had told Lieutenant Lane what had happened, Lane put out an APB for the bright orange VW Bug. Lane stated in an interview that other than an actual clown car, the bright orange van that Pamela had chosen to drive was very discernible and easy to spot out on the roads. Pamela. Brilliant, kick-ass bitch. I love you, Pamela. We need to be friends. Now, there were anywhere between 50 and 60 cruisers out looking for that van LaPlante was driving. And there were many calls coming in with sightings of the van. The police were very quickly able to corner LaPlante inside a lumberyard in the town of Ayr, which is very close to Pepperell. The police officers started methodically searching the lumberyard, and suddenly one officer saw a head pop up out of a dumpster and then quickly duck back down. It was LaPlante, right in the trash where he belongs. Once LaPlante realized that he had been spotted, he leapt out of the dumpster and tried to hide underneath it, but police had him surrounded, and LaPlante was taken into custody. The manhunt was finally over. LaPlante was booked that night, and when police officers were booking LaPlante, they took him for a strip search, which is protocol. But when he got down to his underwear, police realized that he had hidden a gun in his underwear that he had stolen from Lynn McGovern's house. As well, he had a bullet inside his shoe. Thankfully, the police officers conducting the strip search were able to seize the gun and the bullet before LaPlante was able to cause any more harm. On December 4th, 1987, LaPlante pled not guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. This time, LaPlante was not given bail. But the judge did order that LaPlante was to undergo a 20-day psychiatric evaluation, which would take place at the Bridgewater State Hospital. It's about fucking time. He should have had this the first time he got caught, when he terrorized the Bowen family. During the investigation, law enforcement found semen and a pubic hair on the bed under Priscilla's body that did not match Priscilla or her husband Andrew. The district attorney's office requested hair, semen, blood, and saliva samples from LaPlante. Results from the testing of those samples showed that LaPlante was a type A secretor, which means that LaPlante had type A blood and he would secrete type A antigens into his bodily fluids. The semen sample that was found under Priscilla's body was also from a type A secretor. Fibers from the flannel shirt that the tracking dogs had found matched the same shirt that LaPlante was wearing on the day of the murders. As well, fibers from the shirt were also found on socks from his bedroom, the belt found with the murder weapon, and in 3 different places at the murder scene. Shoe prints that were found outside of the Gustafsons' home matched the sneakers LaPlante was wearing when he was arrested. A hair found on one of LaPlante's socks he was wearing when he was arrested belonged to 7-year-old Abigail Gustafson. LaPlante continued to claim his innocence and told police that they had the wrong person. LaPlante's family, mainly Elaine, his mother, felt that the police were under pressure from the powers that be to solve the Gustafson triple murder, to ease the community panic that had set in, and in response to that pressure, they had targeted Daniel LaPlante and made LaPlante a scapegoat. You know what, Elaine? An innocent man doesn't run. An innocent man doesn't kidnap a woman. An innocent man doesn't hide from police. This mother is something else, man. To begin with, if my 16-year-old son had tortured and terrorized a family for months by hiding in their home and then held them hostage with a fucking hatchet, the last thing I would do is bail them out. I would be asking the judge to commit them until someone figured out what was going inside their tiny little brain. But not Elaine. Apparently, Elaine just thought everything was fine and it was just a little incident at the Bowens' house. It wasn't a little fucking incident, Elaine. He terrorized them. He threatened to kill them with a fucking hatchet. Get your head on straight, woman. Elaine stated that the only reason LaPlante had run from the police that night was because he was nervous about his upcoming court case, where he was facing the charges from holding the Bowen family hostage. No, that's not why he ran, Elaine. He ran because he's a fucking coward and he murdered a pregnant woman and her 2 babies in cold blood. Robert Casey, LaPlante's defense attorney, claimed in a public statement that the police were not able to come up with a motive as to why LaPlante would murder Priscilla, Abigail, and William. You don't really need a motive to murder someone when you're an absolute fucking psychopath, right? As well, Casey stated that someone who he wouldn't name, but stated that they were a reliable source, had called his office and informed him that it seemed as though the murders may have been committed by 2 or more people. And in this public statement, Casey appealed to those who were truly responsible for the murders of Priscilla, Abigail, and William to come forward and clear LaPlante's good name. After all, Casey stated that his client had an alibi for the entire day of the murder. LaPlante was watching music videos on MTV all day, remember? I'm sorry. But that is not an alibi. And if you think that's an alibi, Mr. Robert Casey, defense attorney, you are maybe, perhaps, the biggest shit pig of a lawyer ever. And as far as we know, the person who called Casey's office could have been LaPlante from jail. So because of Robert Casey's theatrics in front of the cameras, police contacted the local TV station and were able to get their hands on a copy of the list of every music video that was played during the time that LaPlante stated he was watching. But here's where the police, they lose a point. It's understandable that they went the way they did in this instance because it was the 80s. The police were trying to see if there was a motive of some kind hidden inside the types of videos LaPlante was watching. And it all comes back to the satanic panic. If I were one of the investigators on this case, I would have asked LaPlante to give me 10 videos. 10 videos that you watched that day, and I bet he wouldn't get more than 3 right. Basically, they were looking for some type of ritualistic, satanic worshipping type of thing in the list of music videos, but nothing ever came of that. For those of you who don't know what the satanic panic is or was, back in the 80s there was this huge moral panic that happened. People thought that there was an uprising of satanic worshiping happening in North America, that young people were killing for ritual sacrifice. Basically, when the movie The Exorcist and The Omen came out, young people were flocking to the cinemas to see these films, which were mainly about demonic possessions and ritual abuse. The adults and the God-fearing folks thought we were all hooked on Satan instead of hooked on phonics. We weren't. We just liked spooky, creepy, weird shit, and these shows were giving it to us. And it was a fun way to scare the shit out of our friends by taking them to a scary movie. We weren't worshiping Satan by listening to Poison and Motley Crue and Quiet Riot and Judas Priest. We just thought it was cool. The artwork was out of this world. Now, don't get me wrong. There were morons in the 80s who did horrible shit and blamed it all on Satan. Those asshats were just doing it for the notoriety they thought they would get. Everything was messed up in the 80s. Parents were panicking that their children would either be stolen and used as a ritual sacrifice or lured into a cult and dance naked around a goat head and participate in the ritual killing of some weird skinny stranger that was tied to a sacrificial stone. Listen, you think your childhood was fucked up? I grew up in the 70s and 80s, bitch. I'm lucky to be alive. And some days I wonder how I've made it this far. Oh, right. Sorry. Back to the case. On April 7th, 1988, Stephen LaPlante, Daniel the Shit Snake's brother, and a friend of his opened the glove compartment of a car that had been sitting on the LaPlante property for years. Inside the glove compartment, they found a loaded .22 caliber semi-automatic revolver, the same type of gun that was used to murder Priscilla. Daniel LaPlante was finally indicted on 28 counts, which included 3 charges for the murder of Priscilla, Abigail, and William, 10 charges that were from the 1986 kidnapping and hostage situation of the Bowen family, and the rest of the charges pretty much were from the flight from justice and manhunt that ensued. In September of 1988, a judge ordered that LaPlante would have to face the murder charges first before he could face any of the other charges. And in October of 88, the trial of Daniel LaPlante finally began. He was 18 at this point, and he was tried as an adult for his crimes. The jury members were selected from places outside of the county where LaPlante had committed his crimes to ensure that the jury chosen wasn't tainted by all the press coverage that the murders and manhunt had received. The prosecution laid out a solid case for the guilt of Daniel LaPlante, eyewitnesses, expert witnesses, and a mountain of evidence that all pointed at Shit Snake LaPlante. And then, before the defense started their case, The defense attorneys asked the judge to ask the jury to consider whether LaPlante was insane. You see, if the jury thought he was insane, then LaPlante could be found not guilty by reason of insanity. At this time, there was a legal loophole that allowed the jury to consider the accused as insane, and if they felt the defendant was in fact insane, they could find them not guilty and sentence them to a stay in a mental health facility. Which in turn meant that if at some point in the future LaPlante was able to pass a psychiatric evaluation, he would be released free and clear from the mental health facility and not spend another day in prison. The judge denied the request from the defense. Thank God for small miracles. Could you imagine? Oh. The prosecution had taken almost 2 weeks to deliver all their 50 witnesses and evidence to the jury. And then it was the defense's turn. But the defense called no witnesses, and Daniel LaPlante did not testify on his own behalf. When closing arguments occurred, Daniel LaPlante's attorney suggested that the evidence that had been presented against him was suggestive at best and had no scientific basis, and therefore should not be used to find the shitsnake LaPlante guilty. As well, the defense attorney argued that there were many other suspects that were better suited to have committed these murders. He suggested to the jury that Stephen LaPlante, Daniel LaPlante's brother, very well could have committed the murder, seeing as how it was Stephen who found the murder weapon. Wow. Nothing like throwing your own family under the bus. Finally, on October 25th, 1988, the jury went into deliberations. The very next day, the jury came back with a verdict. Daniel LaPlante was found guilty on all counts. The judge, Judge Barton, handed down his sentence right away after the jury was finished reading their verdict. Judge Barton said, quote, "There are some who would say that you should receive the same sentence that you imposed on the Gustafson family. That is, death by ligature or hanging. But we have no death penalty in Massachusetts. Accordingly, the sentence to be imposed is one that intends you to spend the rest of your life behind bars with no parole, no commutation, and no furloughs. That is 3 consecutive life sentences." Unquote. In 1993, LaPlante appealed his conviction, but his appeal was denied. In 2013, Daniel LaPlante sued the state of Massachusetts for allegedly denying him access to supplies needed to practice Wicca. LaPlante claimed he was a devout Wiccan and that the state refused to supply him with 30 essential oils and 26 herbs needed for his religious practice. Dragon's blood, black opium, and honeysuckle were just a few of the materials LaPlante said he needed to ward off jinxes and connect with goddesses. Local practitioners of Wicca at the time distanced themselves from LaPlante and stated the materials he requested were unnecessary. In a Boston Globe article, one local Wiccan leader noted that the religion sometimes attracts, quote-unquote, crazy people, obviously meaning LaPlante. You know what? Fuck you, LaPlante, saying that now you're Wiccan. That is just an insult to the beauty of the Wiccan religion. There is not a bone in your body that would be able to comprehend any kind of religion based on respect and love. The gall of this shit snake just blows my mind. Oh, sorry, rant over. In 2017, LaPlante appealed his conviction again. This time, he asked the court to resentence him based on a Supreme Court decision made in 2012. Where the United States Supreme Court held that the prohibition on cruel and unusual punishments contained in the 8th Amendment to the United States Constitution forbids mandatory sentences of life without parole for juveniles. The main argument for this was that as juveniles, the offenders' brains were not fully developed and therefore couldn't make completely rational choices when committing their crimes. They made this decision partially retroactive, so many convicted killers that were juveniles at the time of their crimes were suddenly eligible for parole after 15 years, which, if you think about the potential number of convicted killers that would have been set free by this decision, that's terrifying, man. You see, according to what LaPlante was sentenced to for the first-degree murder charges, he was to serve 3 consecutive life terms, which meant he wasn't eligible for parole for 45 years. But in 2017, when he asked the courts to resentence him to 3 concurrent life sentences, that meant that if the judge agreed, he would have been eligible for parole then. But thankfully, there was testimony at the appeal hearing from a psychiatrist who had performed evaluations on LaPlante, and that psychiatrist stated unequivocally that brain development had no impact on the decisions to murder the Gustafson family, and that LaPlante has not shown any remorse for his crimes whatsoever in the 30 years he had been behind bars. The judge ruled that LaPlante was not eligible to be considered for resentencing due to the brutal and heinous nature of his crimes, and that he would have to serve the full 45 years before he could apply for parole. Within the court records of this appeal hearing, there is a statement of agreed facts of the case, which means that both the prosecution and the defense have agreed that the information within that statement is true. Trigger warning for this part here, it is horrible. I'm going to read you the statement of agreed facts. According to the statement of agreed facts, LaPlante planned and then broke into the Gustafson home on November 16, 1987, and stole some items. He then decided that at some point he would return to the home. He obtained a gun and lied to a friend of his brother's to get some ammunition. LaPlante then took a few days to practice loading and unloading the gun. On December 1st, LaPlante broke into the Gustafsons' home again with the gun. He lay in wait for whoever came through the door. Priscilla and William entered the house. LaPlante told the court that his first thought was just to jump out the window, but he decided not to. Instead, he jumped out and confronted Priscilla with the gun and forced Priscilla and William up to the bedroom. LaPlante then locked William in a closet and tied Priscilla to the bed. LaPlante stated that his plan was then to leave the house with Priscilla tied to the bed and William in the closet, but he decided not to. He made the decision to rape Priscilla, and after that he murdered her. He then decided to take William to the bathroom and drown him. LaPlante then stated that as he was leaving the home, he encountered Abigail and coaxed her into a different bathroom and drowned her. He then left the house and attended his niece's birthday party as if nothing happened. That's just absolutely horrific. The trauma and the pain that he caused to those poor children and Priscilla, it's too much for a brain to even comprehend. This 18-year-old puke stain has caused. And honestly, I don't think that statement of agreed facts is an absolute true accounting of what happened inside that house. There are holes in this story, and I don't think that we'll ever know, nor do we really need to know the exact details. This version was horrific enough. But where was Abigail when Priscilla and William walked inside the house? How did LaPlante not know she existed until he bumped into her after murdering Priscilla and William? I think that part of it is bullshit. I think LaPlante is lying. I think he knew about Abigail, and I just think he tried to minimize as much as he could. And I also think that it's absolute horseshit that LaPlante even tried to say that he had thoughts of jumping out the window and leaving before doing anything bad. No, he didn't. He came to this house with a game plan in mind, and that was raping and murdering. This shitfuck is an absolute psychopath, and at the time, he was only 17 years old. To me, that is almost unbelievable that someone could be this cold and calculating at such a young age. In 2019, LaPlante appealed his sentence again, using the same argument, that of his brain not being fully developed, and again asked the court to commute his sentence to concurrent life sentences. But thankfully again, he was denied. Lieutenant Lane stated in an interview that he doesn't think that LaPlante has changed at all since being sent to prison. Lane believes that if LaPlante is ever granted parole, that more people will die. Lane stated that he does interviews as often as he can so that people will know what LaPlante did, and hopefully it will help to keep him in prison. Because according to Lane, LaPlante deserves to die in a cell alone. My thoughts. I believe that there are some people who are just evil, and I think that Daniel LaPlante is one of them. The absolute destruction that this shitfuck caused is too much for many people to even dream up. Normally, when I do a case, I will give you as much background information as I can on the perpetrator, and in many cases there is a history of abuse or major trauma, and Daniel LaPlante's background is not much different. But there are many, many people out there who had just as bad or worse upbringings as Daniel LaPlante, and they were able to not terrorize families or annihilate them. So I don't think we need to give any fucks about Daniel LaPlante's upbringing. He is an absolute psychopath, and I think that both nature and nurture caused this animal to be produced. My only regret is that the state of Massachusetts didn't have the death penalty when he was sentenced, because he would have been worm food by now. He was a different, pimply-faced, weird kid, and instead of embracing that weirdness like others have, he went to the evil side and stayed there. Priscilla was a wonderfully sweet woman who doted on her family and was overjoyed that she and Andrew were going to be having another baby. Abigail and William were beautifully happy children at the time of their murders. Abigail was excited as she was to attend her very first slumber party the next week. Andrew has had to pick up the pieces of himself and try and get through the pain, all because of a 16-year-old psychopath. The Bowen family never received any form of judicial justice because LaPlante was never tried. Once LaPlante was found guilty of the Gustafson murders, the prosecutor's office decided not to prosecute any of the other charges. LaPlante has never shown any remorse of any kind for his crimes, and that is what solidifies him as a psychopath in my books. They should throw him in a cell, lock the door, and melt the key as far as I'm concerned. In 2033, when LaPlante is 62 years old, he can apply for parole again. Priscilla's sister, Beth Williams, stated in a 2019 article in the Boston Globe, "There can be no justice. The only justice would have been if it had never happened. Those were 4 people that were killed." Beth stated, "When he is 62 and applies for parole, we will be there at the hearing for as long as we live, and our children will be there after us to make sure the parole board knows the damage that he's done. We are still heartbroken over this." Priscilla's brother, Reverend William Morgan Jr., stated outside the courthouse after that same 2019 hearing, "Is it justice? How can you say it's justice? He executed Priscilla and her children. When he lifts that life sentence off them, we can lift the life sentence off of him." That was a horrific case. Just tragic. What a piece of shit this guy is. And with that, I think we'll leave it there for this week. Stay safe, get your pap test done, and enjoy your day today. This has been a Bitter Witness production.